For those of you who don't know me, my name is Maria Gatto. Thank you to joining us today to the next Borderscape project seminar. For those of you who don't know about the project, the Borderscape project investigates how the Egyptian state formation impacted and transformed the social-spatial landscape of the First Nile Cataract region in the 4th and 3rd millennium BCE. As I said, I'm the PI of the project, and the project is founded by the Norway Grants, working together for a green, competitive and inclusive Europe, and by the National Science Center of Poland through the Pol's Call. And it is hosted by the Institute of Mediterranean and Oriental Cultures at the Polish Academy of Sciences in Warsaw. If you want to know more about the Borderscape project, you can visit our website, you can visit our social media pages, and of course you can send us an email if you have specific questions you want to answer. 3 of our seminars, previous seminars, are already available online. So if you go on YouTube and you check the IKŚiO so our institute web YouTube address, so it's written here down below, IKŚiO 9680. You will find the Borderscape project seminar series, the first 3 seminars by Professor Chiara Brambilla, Professor Juan Carlos Moreno Garcia, and Dr. Oren Siegel. So if you go there, you can already watch them if you haven't watched them already. Today's seminar is presented by Dr. Marie-Kristin Schröder of the German Archaeological Institute in Cairo. And its title is The Emergence of the C-Group in the Area of the First Cataract, Searching for a Link Between the Early and Middle Nubian Ceramic Traditions. So let me give you a brief introduction of Dr. Schröder. Dr. Schröder received a PhD in Egyptology in 2021 from the University of Leipzig, with a study on the Middle Nubian pottery in the frame of Egypto-Nubian contacts during the late 3rd and the early 2nd millennium BCE. The major accomplishment of her doctoral research has definitely been the revision of the chronology of the Nubian C-Group culture. Her research focuses on the study of Nubian pottery from settlement as well as funerary contexts. Since 2010, she is a member of the German-Swiss mission at Elephantine Island at the First Nile Cataract, where she oversees the Nubian pottery analysis. She was a member of the Hierakonpolis expedition of the Ashmolean Museum, where she studied the Nubian pottery from the excavation of the Nubian cemetery HK27C, and joined the excavation by the University of Neuchâtel of the Eastern Cemetery at Kerma, where again she oversaw the study of the Nubian pottery. So, without further ado, my dear Marie, the floor is yours. I stop sharing the screen. Let's see. And let's try with yours.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much, Maria, for this very kind introduction, and also, of course, for inviting me to this Borderscape Seminar series, where I'm very happy now to present my research on the emergence of the C-Group in the area of the First Cataract and the search for a link between the Early and Middle Nubian ceramic traditions. As you can see already on the title slide, I go chronologically backwards. So this is a very characteristic C-Group bowl, which we will see more of later. And then it's dated around 2300 BCE. And I want to go backwards in time via the Pre-Kerma culture until the terminal A group. But first to the area of the First Cataract. As we all know, it's located in southern Upper Egypt. The topographical border between Egypt and Nubia. Here a close up. So here Elephantine, then all of Lower Nubia, which is now completely flooded during the high dams building activities in the south of Aswan. The First Cataract is commonly located between Shelal and Aswan, but it does extend geographically and ecologically until the Gebel Silsila in the north and Bab el Kalabsha in the south. But it is by far a stringent border but rather a very intercultural contact zone between Nubia and Egypt, in which always had Nubian cultures attested from prehistory to modern times, as is also well attested in the name of the first Upper Egyptian nome, Tarzeti, the land of the bow, that shows clearly that we always had a Nubian population component in this area. So for the just for the setting of this talk tonight, the geographic distribution and dating of the early and middle Nubian cultures. So one of the oldest culture in that area is the famous A-group culture, which is, I'm sorry, now it's a little bit small. It was supposed to be larger, but managed. Which is distributed between roughly Heracompolis, so Upper Egypt, until the Second Cataract. And the Second Cataract is also the center of the A-group, probably with the famous cemetery Kustul. The early A-group is dated between 3800 and 2900 BCE. And I will mainly focus today later on the terminal A-group. Then around 600 years later, in the same area, but also extended much more south to the Kerma region and to the north until Gebelein, where we have evidence for a Nubian population attested through funerary stelae, where Nubians are depicted, and through some Nubian incised bowls, and then until Kerma, but mainly in Lower Nubia and southern Upper Egypt. The C-group, as Maria already mentioned, has recently been revised in my PhD thesis. So the new dates are 2300 BCE until roughly 1850, 1800 BCE. And as you can see here, this is contemporary to the 12th dynasty, so that the C-group already ceases in the archaeological record during the later 12th dynasty and not in the beginning of the New Kingdom, as was formerly supposed, but I will extend on that a little bit going on. Then we have, of course, the Kerma culture, which is mainly attested in Upper Nubia, but also goes down into Lower Nubia, but mainly in the Kerma Classique. So the Kerma ancien is really just between Kerma and Zai in this area. Then as a fourth Nubian culture, we have the so-called Pengrave Horizon, which was thoroughly studied by Marie-Kristin Schröder in the past years, which shows quite a different distribution of sites and goes up to Middle Egypt, Mostageda, but also we have attestations of pottery in the close to the Nile Delta. So to set the frame for this talk, I want to first give a very short introduction to the C-group culture so that we are all on the same page. It was defined by George Weisner in 1910 in the frame of the Archaeological Survey of Nubia, when northern Lower Nubia was first threatened by flooding through the first Aswan high dam. We have many attested cemeteries, but far less settlements. And the burial customs are very straightforward throughout Lower Nubia, even up to Upper Egypt, and even reaching down to the Kerma basin. So we have these very nicely built small tumuli with diameters between 1 and 2 meters in the beginning of the C-group, which then reach up to 16 meters in the later 12th dynasty. Very important is the exterior deposition of funerary vessels, very often on the east side of the tumuli. The burial is placed in a contracted position, as I hope you can see it here on the right side, with the head in the east facing north, which is a very typical Nubian burial custom also for the early Kerma culture. And of course, we have, in my opinion, one of the most beautiful examples of Nubian pottery from the C-group culture, with these amazing designs, of which you will see a lot more tonight. The main study of the C-group was conducted by Manfred Bitak and published in 1968. And he dated, as I already mentioned, the C-group between the late 6th and the early 18th dynasty, mainly based on the development of the burial customs, but also on small finds, mainly Egyptian seals, to have a synchronization with the pharaonic culture. But this dating was recently challenged from a couple of researchers for not including these Egyptian vessels. And indeed, the knowledge since the 1960s has far exceeded. We now have very nicely stratified pottery sequences from several settlements in Egypt with the start of the settlement archaeology in the in the 60s. So now we actually have the chance to look at this pottery again and to re-evaluate the dating of the C-Group, which was one of the main goals for my PhD. I don't want to talk too much about this very late C-Group, but I think it's important also to know about for the intercultural connections between the Nubian cultures, so the Kerma culture and Penguin culture. So when I looked at the pottery and I made also distribution patterns and maps like Vitak did before, but only with the C-Group pottery, we now can see that in the youngest tombs, which are here at the end cemetery at Aniba, is a case example in the southwest and northeast. These are the largest tombs, and the cemetery has a concentric development, so it started here, and then in the end, on the fringe, in these large tombs, we have the youngest pottery. And when we look at this pottery, it does not extend beyond the early 13th dynasty, and this is already a stretch, but most of the forms we actually find in the late 11th, early 12th dynasty. And therefore, the handbook of the Middle Kingdom pottery by Robert Schiessel and Anne Seiler was extremely useful to get an overview of the pottery dates and to really pinpoint the dating of the end cemetery at Aniba, and then further on also for other cemeteries in Lower Nubia. So the result is a change in chronology, and I've shown this slide before on several conferences, but just to show you this again, we have here Vitak's end of the C-Group, and this phase 3, which now shifts way up into the advanced 12th dynasty because there was just no evidence at all in small finds or pottery for a second intermediate period date of the C-Group. The beginning of the C-Group is relatively the same. We are in the 6th dynasty, mid-6th dynasty. Vitak was in the end of the 6th dynasty, but this has to do with also chronological changes within Pharaonic chronology over the last 60 years. So just that as an example for what looking at pottery, even excavated 100 years ago, can still do. But let's turn to the early C-Group and to the emergence of the C-Group. In the past research, in the first half of the 20th century, we had always the impression, or the researchers had the impression that local development was not granted to the Nubian cultures. So once they had this amazing pottery, we had these wonderful cemeteries of the C-Group, they always thought a local development from the A-Group with this gap of roughly 600 years is not possible, and there has to be an immigration. So already Juncker proposed an immigration from the southeast, from the Blue Nile or the Atbara region to the Lower Nubia, and also Steindorf, followed by Vitak and Sibelius Chen, thought of an immigration from the southern western desert to the Second Cataract. Török also followed this, but proposed an immigration from the Lakia region. But we have also quite some evidence against this immigration. For example, already Egyptian sources of the 6th dynasty. So we have the tomb inscriptions of Veni and Harchuf from the 6th dynasty. Here, an example from the tomb of Harchuf at Sekubet al-Hawa, because he was actually a governor living in Elephantine and buried in the Kubet al-Hawa. And he, as well as Harchuf and Veni, they already mentioned Nubian chiefdoms, developed Nubian chiefdoms with social hierarchies during the 6th dynasty, and these were called Egyptian toponyms, Irchat, Wawat, Yam, and Medjay, which we can see here on the map. Wawat, we think, is located just south of the First Cataract, or still in that area of the First Cataract, south of Elephantine. And then we have the other chiefdoms. And these were already then united in the course of the 6th dynasty and First Intermediate period. So if we already have developed social hierarchies in Nubia, how is it possible that during the 6th dynasty, suddenly some people come in from the south, southeast, southwest, and then just start this new big civilization of the C-Group culture? So already Adams in 1977 proposed a different approach, and he was the opinion, of course he was right, that Nubian populations were a constant part in the Upper Egyptian and of course the Lower Nubian Nile Valley. Dietrich Raue made a very thorough research state-of-the-art research, and stated that the formerly empty areas, so all of these areas where the C-group was supposedly coming from, have been explored over the past decades, and there was no reason to really see a big immigration line to Lower Nubia. So in his opinion, the C-group is the Nile Valley development of the 4th millennium BCE, following the A-group. And we are going to look into this tonight. It's also attested that the innovations for the old researchers were for the longest time not granted to these Nubian populations from this Eurocentric colonial land. So there had to be something new. Someone had to migrate, which is also the case for the older prehistoric research, prehistoric archaeology. So what do we have in the early C-group? I just want to give you 2 examples for settlements. The first one is Zayala, located here south of the First Cataract, which was excavated by Manfred Bitak between 1961 and 1965. And we already see a stone structure. We have a fencing building. So we have interior structures already in the settlement. So it's not only post holes, as also has been previously proposed. The pottery from the context of the settlement, as Bitak very rightfully already pointed out, is that we have these row impressions, the black top fineware with these vertical row impressions. We have triangles with fillings, and of course the incised bowls with very early motifs, which we know well from the cemeteries. Another settlement is at Aniba, here at the Crosco Bend. And in the earliest occupation phase of this of the settlement, we have several huts. We have the post-hole constructions, and it's still a very small settlement, also comparable to the early occupation of the cemetery. Then this is just an example for a reconstruction of the so-called Rundhütte 1, which is slightly subterranean. And then we have this rounded construction. And here's a picture of the excavations with the post holes in place below actually one of these structures. The pottery is also very clearly early C-group, which has been already pointed out by Steindorf, but then of course also by Manfred Bitak. Just as an example for how does the early C-group look at a cemetery, I want to bring again the end cemetery at Aniba, which is the largest known cemetery with 929 tombs. It was excavated by Georg Steindorf and Langsdorff between 1912 and 1914, and then again after the World War between 1930 and 31. As I already mentioned, we have this concentric development, and in the center we have these black dots, which are actually stela, large funerary stela with a sandstone stela with a round top, which mark the oldest tombs. You can see here a very tiny tumulus, about 1.5 meters in diameter. Again, we already have this exterior deposition of pottery. And just as a panorama view, which I found always very impressive to see to show the preservation of the site. This is a view from this area. With the chapels, the mud brick chapels still in place, the large cumuli of roughly 60 meters in diameter. Yeah, but the early C-group is mainly here. And just because they are so pretty, I want to show some examples of the forms and the patterns. So we have very flat forms in the beginning of the C-group, which then change to very deep forms and smaller. We have a variety of patterns attested throughout Lower Nubia, even going into Kerma. Again, we have these vertical impressions, but we also have Egyptian pottery, which can be related to the 6th dynasty. Yeah, and I think the C-group handicraft is, in my opinion, one of the best Nubian handicrafts in this period. The early shapes, I just chose the vertical row impressions because they will become important later on, are distributed, not surprisingly, at the stela so very close to these. And then we also have this interlaced rim band. An example is here, which is also very closely related to these stela. And then when we then connect the Egyptian pottery, we actually have the real development of the cemetery. Another example are these quite famous banded bowls, the so-called Flechtmuster. We have a version with smaller fields, we have a version with larger fields. And the one with the smaller fields is older than the one with the larger fields. That already shows a wider distribution throughout the cemetery core. So do we have early C-Group now at the First Cataract? Actually, no, not much. There is a marked absence of early C-Group sites in this area. We mainly have attestations south of Bab el-Kalabsha, so in Ger Hussein, Zayala, Dhaka Cemetery 101, where we also have a nice A-group presence. And then we have the next accumulation at the Korosko band here, more to the south, and then a couple of sites, Adendan, Zera East, Debera, Ashkait, a lot of sites with a lot of early C-Group presence. What we do have at the First Cataract is a later C-Group, which is quite well attested, with Kuba near north, the cemetery that Junga excavated, and Maria relocated the location actually in her project. Hieracompolis HK27C, where I work with Renee, and newly discovered by Maria, Sheikh Mohammed SM13. So we see there is not a lot of early C-Group at the First Cataract, but we do have ceramic evidence well known from the Upper Egyptian settlements, from Elephantine, Edfu, and possibly Kombondo in the future. So Elephantine, as we know, is the border town and the cultural hotspot of the First Cataract, from where expeditions, military or trade expeditions, reach out to Nubia. There has been a new excavation project, the Realities of Life project, directed by Johanna Siegel in the area of the northwestern town since 2014. Here is the location of the two trenches that were excavated. We look here from the lower trench to the upper trench in this direction. And the trench is located next to the step pyramid of the Third Dynasty. What we already see in this picture here is that the lower trench was very well disturbed by the excavations of the Germans and the French in the early 20th century. But the next trench that we excavated after was very well preserved, and we can already see the amazing stratigraphy that we have preserved in the layers. And we actually do have a stratigraphy that covers the 6th to the early 18th dynasty, although the 18th dynasty is only preserved in a few wall fragments, but nevertheless, this is the best known stratigraphy from Elephantine that we have so far. So I studied the Nubian pottery sherds. There were in total 1,400 sherds within the assemblage of the Egyptian pottery, which mark only around 0.5 to 2% of the entire assemblages. We have two main pottery or ceramic traditions at Elephantine in that period of time. So from the 6th dynasty to the early 18th dynasty, there is at one point, there's the C-Group, here highlighted in orange, which covers the mid-late 6th dynasty to late 12th. There is this, some sherds, very few, might be still a combination, but most of it really ends in the later 12th dynasty. And then we have a second tradition, the so-called Pengrave style, which is here, mid-late 13th dynasty at Elephantine, and there is still a debate if it shouldn't be earlier, but I think not. We will need to wait for more data. And the Pengrave style pottery here, green, suddenly increases the inventory considerably. So there is a big, big jump during the 13th dynasty and then also in the second limited period. What we also see from this graph is that we have very few fine wares. So here are the fine wares. Green is again Pengrave, so the younger pottery, the later pottery. But then we mainly have domestic wares, and which is especially significant because, as we know, Lower Nubia is flooded. There are no new excavations in that area, so that we have this domestic pottery from Elephantine is especially important, as has been shown in the wonderful work by Dietrich Rauer already, which I built on, but more with a qualitative and quantitative approach. So I look at every body short even to have statistics. So what we have is C-Group pottery here. Again, the fineware, very few pieces, and then the courseware, again with the triangles, the rim top decoration, quite the coarse surface. And then later on we have the pengrave pottery, with sometimes the black rim painted on. We have always this empty rim zone and different crisscross patterns. So these two styles are very clearly separatable. And now, as I have shown in my PhD, are also not contemporary, which will, I think, once we go back to older material, solve many issues we had for many years. So again, early C-Group pottery, how does it look like from the view of Elephantine? We have again these vertical row impressions, and I'm always surprised by the different technology of or different how it looks differently in every single row, which is quite enormous. And then again, here we have the vertical row impression. It's not very well visible. It's very, very shallow. But we also have very early examples of incised bowls, here with the interlaced rim band, geometric patterns. We also have the early blacktop finewares, which again often have this very shallow form with an inflected contour in the lower part, very nicely burnished, very well made. Then we have these courseware, which we don't have many of from settlements because there are not so many. But again, we have the triangles. They are just an occurring momentum, and we have the rim top decoration. The site I already mentioned, that was excavated from Maria Gatto and her team, Sheikh Mohammed SM13, is a possible campsite assigned to the C-Group and located in a rock shelter with rock art. Here you have a view of the site. And here are the related sherds. So again, we have the triangle. So this could be early C-Group, but I think the material is not numerous enough to see what the actual date is. But Maria, maybe I'm wrong, and we can discuss this later. Okay, so let's jump back from the early C-Group 600 years back in the past to the terminal A-Group. Here are the sites in Lower Nubia. We don't have that much in the First Cataract area, but we have a lot in the Baden and Haga area and Wadi Halfa. So the closest site for terminal E-Group is actually Gap Hussein, where these vessels are formed. So the terminal A-Group very characteristic eggshellware, of which we here have some very nice examples, which are now, I think, in Boston Museum. And of course, we have the wonderful pottery from Kustul, from the area of the Second Cataract, and from this elite cemetery. So during the First Dynasty, it seems, so until then, in the Nagada period, it seems that the C-Group and the A-Group and the Nagada free populations had quite a good relationship. We have many finds of each culture and tombs. We have A-Group sites attested throughout Upper Egypt. But then in the First Dynasty, something happened, and suddenly the archaeological remains of this A-Group disappear during the First Dynasty. And we have, although from the Fourth Dynasty, on the Palermo stone attested that Snofru took away or captured 4,000 men and 3,000 women and 200,000 cattle, and he was hacking up the land of the south and delivery of the captives. This is clearly an exaggerated number, but there seem to be quite a number of military activities against the A-Group, and maybe it actually really is the case that the Egyptians really threw out the A-Group out of Lower Nubia. But we don't know anything about this, and this is the a widely discussed topic, but there are no more cemeteries or settlements attested. What we do have at the First Cataract is again Elephantine, the material that IKŞiO studied. We have sherds from the tombs at the southern end at Elephantine, which date to the Nagada. The Egyptian pottery dates to Nagada 2D to 3C, around 3,400 to 2,900 BCE, which then again is contemporary to the terminal A group. So we have evidence for the rippled surfaces here, plain courseware, slow impressions of kindness, etc. at the area. So there was definitely a cultural contact whatsoever between the A group and the early dynastic Egyptian cultures. So we have this enigma of the Lower Nubian hiatus. We have only few archaeological remains between the terminal A group and the C group. So here, these around 600 years with barely any attestations. Reisner tried to fill this gap with the definition of the so-called B group, which was then actually in the 1960s identified as older and poorer A group tombs. So there is no B group, as Reisner defined it. And the Nubian hiatus is also more an empowerment of the archaeological evidence than a complete void, as has been also figured out before. But we don't have actual sites attested. So it has been proposed in the past that the A group went maybe back to a semi-nomadic or nomadic lifestyle, maybe back into the hinterland of Lower Nubia, maybe even up to Upper Nubia with Kerma. And here we have the Pre-Kerma culture that has been discovered only 40 years ago. And according to the dating, or C14 dating, this Pre-Kerma culture could actually fill this gap. Yeah, this was also supposed to be very different. I'm really, really sorry. The Pre-Kerma culture is mainly attested between the third and the second cataract, and is contemporary with the middle and terminal A group. And now this can go. We have here the famous Eastern Cemetery of Kerma, which has been excavated firstly by Reisner, and then excavations were continued by Charbonnet and now are being carried out by Marie-Kristin from the University of Neuchâtel. In the beginning, the research was always concentrated on the big tombs, the chieftain tombs, the kings of Kerma. But the reality is that this area is way more interesting, at least for me and I think for many others, because here we have the actual beginning of the Kerma-Anxion occupation of the Eastern Cemetery. And during these excavations that were carried out here in the pink fields by Bonnet, he found Kerma. I just make this bigger because now it doesn't really matter. So this is how one of these pre-Kerma settlements looks like. We have hundreds of storage pits. We have hut constructions. We have fence constructions. So everything that is grayish was interpreted as a hut. And all of this was found below the oldest tombs of the Kerma-Anxion culture. So thanks to the effort by Mathieu Honegger, we actually have a lot of material now from the pre-Kerma as well as from the Kerma-Anxion, because he really focused on the study of this very important material. Interestingly, we only have 2 pre-Kerma tombs in all of Upper Nubia, but a large number of settlements. So this is a complete difference between the C group, for example, or the A group, or the Penrith culture, where we barely have settlements, and mainly the cemeteries. So that's quite interesting. The pottery is very characteristic, and we see things that we already saw for the C group and partly also for the terminal A group, although the terminal A group pottery is painted on, and this all is incised, as well as C group pottery that is only incised. But we have here these chevron patterns. We have the horizontal row impressions in in the early IKŞiO, but already in the late Pre-Kerma, triangles filled with hatching, etc. So do we have Pre-Kerma at the First Cataract and beyond? Not much. We have evidence from Elephantine, again through the ceramic corpus, as well as from Edfu, Armand, and Zinki from the small step pyramid south of Abydos. And we have Pre-Kerma pottery from Bohème. So I'll show first Bohème. And here again, we have these horizontal lines of chevrons. We have horizontal fineware with row impressions, more chevrons, the triangles. So this is all a very early C-group-ish, except the fact that in the early C-group we have vertical row impressions and here we have horizontal row impressions. From the record at Elephantine dating to the 4th, 5th dynasties, and again we have the same as Bohème as in Pre-Kerma, the triangles with the chevrons, the horizontal row impressions. So it's really surprisingly similar. Then from Armand, there was a cemetery that was excavated by Mong and Mayas in the 1930s, published 1937. And again, we see the chevrons, the triangles, and the row impressions. Here are 4 shirts that have been published by Evan D'Souza, 2019, in Mechan News, in the Journal of Heracompolis, that Winnie Friedman is editing and managing. And here we can again see a fineware, also dating from layers of the 4th, 5th dynasty at Edfu, with a very clear resemblance also to the Pre-Kerma culture. And then what we have at Elephantine at the same time. So Pre-Kerma at Elephantine. We have Nubian pottery attested throughout the hiatus. We have very close parallels to Pre-Kerma with these shirts. For example, here the chevrons, the row impressions, the built surfaces. But then in the 6th dynasty, we have a change in development to pottery that we call early C-Group. That appears to be just really a development and a continuation of what we have at the island before and supposedly in all of Lower Nubia. So there is no immigration visible, at least from Elephantine and I think also from the other sides. So then we go on from the Pre-Kerma to the IKŞiO. So again, we are back to Kerma at the 3rd Cataract. We again have here the map of the Eastern Cemetery. So before we talked about the settlements that are below the most ancient tombs in the Eastern Cemetery. Now we talk about the actual most ancient tombs which have very, very close parallels to the early C-Group. We have stela in the Kerma IKŞiO 0, as we can see here in the lower picture. They look different, but I mean it's quite clear that these are that they resemble the Lower Nubian examples. We also have small tumuli, although differently built, but the body orientation, and I think this is a very important cultural marker, the body orientation stayed the same, so contracted on the right side with the head on the east, facing north. We also have an exterior deposition of ceramics, but only of the ceramics that are in C-Group style. And as you see here, we have a very closely related C-Group patterns. But what the pottery is different in that regard that in Kerma or in the Kerma or the Kerma IKŞiO contexts, we have restricted orifices. While in the C-Group, the early examples are very shallow and open. So this is a difference. But sometimes I'm still surprised when I see that I have a one-to-one parallel from, for example, Aniba and Kerma, and it's very, very cool. So of course we know since the works by Gracion and Privati that we have this Kerma IKŞiO pottery, but we only had a very small database because excavations by Bonnet here in pink were always they were systematic, but he opened very small areas because he wanted to get a view of the whole of the cemetery. But Mathieu opened much wider areas, excavated every tomb in these opened areas. And I'm very, very grateful for Mathieu that he entrusted me with this very important material, the C-Group style pottery and the Egyptian pottery that is also excuse me, very well attested in the Eastern Cemetery. So what do we have in Kerma and the Kerma-IKŞiO? So here we can see a close-up of the sectors CE28 and CE27, where we have the interlaced rim band I mentioned a few times. The example from Elephantine we saw before dates to the 6th dynasty. And we have them also from Kerma in several instances, and they are always distributed in the very oldest part of the cemetery. Again, we have the Flechtmuster, and it's amazing. In Kerma, we have around 181 individual incised bowls, which are often, as you can see here in the plate, very, very fragmented. It's much more fragmented than the Lower Nubian examples, but still sometimes the surface is still so well preserved that we can still see this metallic shine that derives from the burnishing of the pots, and it's just exquisite, exquisite workmanship. And again, the patterns of the C-Group material in Lower Nubia and the C-Group style material at Kerma-IKŞiO are surprisingly similar, which we can also see here. I don't want to bore you too much with the pottery, just to give you an idea. We have this pattern exactly the same in Aniba and several, this one. So it's really, the resemblance is amazing and very, very interesting. But what we also have is Egyptian pottery or Egyptian style pottery in the Kerma-IKŞiO cemetery. We have in total 131 individual vessels. They mostly date to the Kerma-Moyon, but we do have also a lot for the Kerma-IKŞiO. The first study of this pottery from the Egyptian pottery from Kerma was done by Janine Bourriot, published in 2004. But again, through this, as you can see, the systematic excavations by Mathieu, also this data set has been much extended with new material, which now can be analyzed. And it's very clear from the ceramic evidence that we have 6th dynasty in the most ancient sector 28 in this Eastern Cemetery. So we have this beautiful double-lined bowl with the coronation and these large ovoid storage jars. Okay, admittedly, from Kerma, we have like 10, 12 examples of this red slip from the shoulder. This is very clear from the shoulder, although it's just a small body shard. But it's very clear that it comes from one of these, or from a couple of these vessels, dating to the 6th dynasty, maybe early First Nile Middle period, but mainly 6th dynasty. Also, this is mid to late 6th dynasty from the record that we have at Elephantine with the amazing stratigraphy and the pottery sequence that has been worked out by Peter Kopp in 2020 and published, and another fragment of a closed jar, of a closed form, which we have also in the northwestern town at Elephantine, dating to the late 6th, early 11th dynasty. So we can see that clearly we have pottery dating to the 6th dynasty, early First Nile Middle period, also in Kerma, together with the motifs that we have from the early C-Group. So this is all one big horizon. But we have the big problem of the chronological discrepancies between the Kerma-IKŞiO and the C-Group. So I think I made quite clear that the pottery is very similar in Lower Nubia and Upper Nubia to quite a certain extent. But we have the divergence in chronologies. So the Kerma-IKŞiO starts already according to the C14 data, around 2550 BCE, and the early C-Group around 2300. So now we have the question, is the Egyptian chronology too low, or are the C14 dates from Kerma too old? It might just be a combination of both, and I'm very grateful to Maria because she just a few days ago sent me this astronomical study that proposes a high chronology with the new dates for the Old Kingdom from the 4th dynasty. And here we can see that it's already roughly 130 years early. So this is second, and the low chronology is 2200, but then the high is 2334. So there is already the successive alignment of the chronologies. And I don't think that the ceramic record lies. I mean, it speaks for itself. It's, I mean, when I looked at the Kerma material, I was actually quite surprised because I didn't expect this, but we have the record, we have the evidence. So now we need to move on and need to maybe also try to get more C14 data from the Egyptian side of the story. But we will see. So to sum up, the E-group and the C-group are very often settled in the same areas, especially in Lower Nubia, which is very well attested at several cemeteries where we have first an occupation of the E-group and we have an occupation of the C-group. And I don't think this is purely ecological. There must be a common Nubian tradition when people go back to the same sites that maybe also have a religious meaning, a cultural meaning in terms of burial places and rock shelters and rock inscriptions, etc. The terminal A group, I think, is related to the Pre-Kerma ceramics, pattern-wise, but the execution changed because now we have in the Pre-Kerma mainly exclusively incised ceramics, whereas in the terminal A group it was mostly painted on. But yeah, the same patterns and also this so-called Flechtmuster is very well visible from the A group to the Pre-Kerma, leading into the C-group culture, the early C-group. The Pre-Kerma and the Kerma-IKŞiO know the horizontal row impressions. The C-group does not restart with the vertical executions. But it is also very clear that the C-group and Kerma-IKŞiO share common traditions. Not only in the ceramics, but also in the position of the body, in the burial customs, in the erection of stelae. So they are closely related in the Kerma basin during the 6th dynasty. It's just a question how and why. The definition of the early C-group sites is by now well established. So we have no sites, or we cannot call sites C-group when we don't have a certain set of material culture. And I know there's also this attempt to have a proto-C-group in the 4th, 5th dynasty, but I think a few of the things are dated wrongly, and this goes a bit far. But of course, I mean, we have to consider that also. And then I think the new evidence from Kerma proves really one contemporaneous line of development for the C-group and the Kerma-IKŞiO in Upper Egypt and until Upper Nubia. So we have the same pottery, very, very similar pottery, never I can say same, in Upper Egypt until Kerma and even beyond Kerma to the south. So the terminal A group eventually vanished in the northern Nile Valley during the First Dynasty, probably maybe through cultural contact and conflicts, but it's still visible throughout the record at Elephantine. So it's possible that maybe some state in Upper Egypt, maybe, I don't like to say this, but maybe adapted the Egyptian culture to some extent, and a part of the community maybe also went southwards, maybe to Kerma, to leave Lower Nubia. So the Pre-Kerma that dates from roughly 3,500 to 2,500 BC covers exactly this area. So it might be possible that A group is actually also Pre-Kerma, or like it's maybe one community or one tradition of pottery, which we see in the archaeological record. In the early Kerma-IKŞiO, we have very strong C-group traditions that actually dominate the oldest cemetery occupation. And then from the Kerma-IKŞiO 2 onwards, roughly, in the Egyptian First Nile period, or phase 1B in the C-group, we have really two lines. So we have the northernmost and the southernmost part. So we go into Lower Nubia and we have the C-group, and then we go to the south of Kerma and the Kerma culture, but it seems to be one origin somehow, but throughout Lower Nubia. The Egyptian pottery analysis now also suggests a parallel development during the 6th dynasty, despite this discrepancy in the absolute chronology, which I believe and I hope will be solved eventually. This is also supported by pharaonic Egyptian sources. And then we have the founding of the early C-Group cemeteries, which we define as early C-Group in Lower Nubia during the 6th dynasty. And the C-Group is then a local Nile Valley development and not caused by immigration. And the early C-Group is the first really archaeologically visibly entity in Lower Nubia after the decline of the A-Group, but as a development, I think, from both the A-Group and the Pre-Kerma culture. And with this, my sincere thanks go to Aaron de Souza, Winnie Friedman, Maria Gatto, of course, Mathieu Honegger, Peter Koch, Dietrich Rau, Stefan Sellermeier, Johanna Sieben, Leslie Warden, and of course to all of you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marie. So, thank you again for giving us an overview. And I hope that there are some questions for you. I have plenty, but I hope, somebody else is going to start. So has anybody has any? Yes, Tony.
What dyes or inks were they using in the early stages for their pottery, or how were the markings created?
For the incision, probably just maybe a piece of straw or a bone, what's the word, a bone needle. For the rocker impression, for this row impression I showed, I'm still not entirely sure. It must have been some kind of comb. We have these serrated shirts where they have notches, so you could really go over the vessel with another pottery shirt. But I think because Maria studied the A-Group so well, maybe she knows it better.
Yeah, some of them are not rockers, so that's also interesting. This kind of lines of dots can be also other kind of like simple impressions, for instance, techniques, maybe with comb, but with different techniques. So not the rocker, but it's very interesting because it changes through times from the A-Group to the Pre-Kerma and then Early Kerma. So it's but it's important because most of the decoration with dots in the A-Group are rocker, while from the Pre-Kerma on, probably they are simple impressions. So this is also very interesting that the technology changed.
Thank you.
Any other question? Yeah, Tony, you have another one?
I do actually. You mentioned a whole bunch of slaves, although you said the number was exaggerated. Where were they capturing themselves to use, or were they shipping the slaves on to somebody else, like Egypt?
I'm sorry, do you refer to the Palermo stone and Snofru capturing 7,000 people?
Yes, yes.
So I don't think it's a true historic account, because we think that the population during the A-Group is roughly 40,000 people. So to capture 7,000, 4,000 men, 3,000 women is already quite the stretch. There are also theories that Snofru actually went into Upper Nubia and just passed the void emptiness of Lower Nubia, but this is also not really realistic. So yeah, we have in the Dashur we have a decree of Pepi II, where he says that he actually wants to have a settlement. It's very, I'm sorry, I cannot recall everything, but that there was he wants a settlement of Nubians, but then he doesn't allow the Nubians to actually settle and buy property in that area. So we know that already in the 4th dynasty and then 6th dynasty we have Nubians settling also maybe in Lower Nubia, Lower Egypt and the Memphis area, but we don't have an actual record. So from Dashur there's only one shirt that shows similarities to the C-Group, and it's it's only one bowl and we don't have more.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
That's true. It's from one of the pyramids there, right? From a queen pyramid.
It's the mastaba of.
Yes, mastaba,
one
right?
of the a female mastaba owner, and
yeah. Yeah, that's true. But what about the Elephantine? From where this Nubian pottery comes from? So is there any specific location that you can see, or it just randomly plays, you know, in the settlement?
it's everywhere. So
It's
from
everywhere.
the beginning, it's everywhere. From the beginning on, there is no. I know that each tried maybe to find out a quarter of Nubians or something, because he studied all the material from the first 39 excavation years. But there is nothing like that. So in the part we excavated now, under the direction of Johanna, we have 1,600 features. In 400 of these features, we have Nubian pottery, and this can be anything. This can be fill layers, this can be occupation layers, floor layers, pits. It's distributed very regularly throughout the settlement, and also from the beginning to the end. But what we do have is in the first dynasty, we have partly 25% of the assemblage that is Nubian. So
25%, 25%. First dynasty.
And it's a very short period, but it's directly related also to the fortress activities. And we just resumed, under the direction of Martin Seelhof and Piet Kopp, we just resumed the excavations in the fortress, also in these layers. I'm going to look at the Nubian pottery, inshallah. So I'm very curious what is happening now.
Me too.
Yeah, but no Nubian quarter. It's really very regularly distributed throughout the settlement.
So you said 25% first dynasty, but then how it goes? It's much less, right?
Then it goes down.
Down, yeah.
Yeah.
So what about the earliest C-Group cemeteries in Lower Nubia? Where are they located?
Now we have the main one in Aniba, we have Dhaka, Gerf Hussein, and then also down to the second cataract, Zera East, I think, but the publication wasn't quite good enough for me to really re-evaluate the material. And then I also found material from Adendan, Cemetery T. Williams always wrote that there is no early C-Group in Adendan T, but we do have stela, we do have the very early designs, so it's definitely already have been used as a cemetery at the second cataract in the early C-Group.
So there is nothing north than Gerf Hussein, let's say, so the Dhaka plain area. That's interesting.
No sites. I mean, we do have, but this is also, I need to go back to this eventually, because we always say C-Group phase 3, dating to the second intermediate period. So this was all put together. It's a C-Group site. But now that we know, and also with the studies by Aaron, we know that C-Group phase 3 does not exist. And these are actually different tombs. So eventually someone has to go back to look at the old archaeological survey of Nubia publications and really figure out what are these tombs. And I plan to do this. And
good. Yeah, that's a good news. Yeah. So you said 6th dynasty. Do we have the name of our king that we can refer on for the earliest evidence, let's say, of the C-Group so far?
No.
So it's mid-6th dynasty. So we are just doing this according to the pottery, right? Is the chronology, yes. The pottery chronology.
I mean, we do have the seals, which already Vitak studied, and also compared to the material that Stefan Seidelmeier studied from Middle Egypt, from the cemeteries. It is mid-6th dynasty. But I saw that Ulrike is also here, so maybe she can jump in. But the seals date, like the earliest, date to around the 6th dynasty and first intermediate period. And then we have very normal 12th dynasty also, so normal Middle Kingdom.
Any question, or Ulrike, if you want to join the conversation? Any question? No? If not, well, I have some comments to let's say to say about the Carla, yes.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. It was really interesting. I was wondering about the Egyptian pottery in C-Group, because you have settlements. How does the Egyptian pottery that you find in C-Group settlement differ from the one that you find in cemetery, or is it the same types?
That is a problem, because we barely have settlements, and when people excavated, like in the 1960s settlements, they mainly collected and studied the Nubian material, which was nice and incised and beautiful, and they left the other pottery aside. But right now I'm working on a research project at the settlement at Armada with the German Archaeological Institute, and there we do have Egyptian pottery that dates roughly to the Middle Kingdom, First Nile period, but I only have inkings. I don't have the actual pottery. So we definitely need more work from the settlements, because this is barely known, because they were also so fragmented. But from the cemeteries, we actually have, especially at Kerma and also Aniba, we have the complete vessels. So it's still also in Egyptian archaeology, we also still have this problem sometimes with the complete forms from the cemeteries, and then what do we make out of the small fragments we have from the settlements?
Yes, of course. Now, I was asking because, as you know, I'm working on the Egyptian pottery from the Pangrave cemeteries, and we have very little campsite pottery, and it's mostly Pangrave. All the Egyptian pottery we have is used and reused, and we have types that are Egyptian pottery of the early 12th dynasty, found, you know, the lovely globular jar in Marley too. We have one from the pottery as Sheikh Mohammed. So I'm wondering, you know, how long will this type have been used and survived in use in Nubia, for example? And how much can we really rely on the Egyptian pottery when we date this kind of contest?
Yeah, I mean, this has always been a problem with the heirlooms and stuff, but I think, because I didn't just look at one cemetery, I looked at, I think 5 or 6 cemeteries in total, in Lower Nubia and Upper Egypt. And it's all the same material, and also connected with the same C-Group material and the same burial customs. So I think it's not, I don't think we can say that, oh, it only reached Upper Nubia or Lower Nubia 100 years later, because this is, I think, not very realistic. I'm sure that probably, possibly the large storage vessels from Mal A3, which we have very many from, once they were coming from Egypt, filled up with wine and whatever we have in them, we don't really know. They kept being in use for a while, I think. But we have many other types that are sometimes not even attested in Egypt. Not many, but like maybe 5 times that we barely have in Egypt, but only in Nubia. So maybe there was also a special production for southern or northern trade in Egypt. So yeah, but I don't think we can say that just because this type ends in Egypt in the late 12th dynasty, that we can just assume it continued 100 years later, for example. I think from some types it might be the case, especially for the repaired pieces, but I don't think it can be realistic for all the assemblage.
No, I wasn't doubting the sequence of your chronology. I was just wondering how you approach these particular problems, and especially when you do not have a huge amount of Egyptian pottery, as I do. My pottery, I mean, the pottery from our cemetery is mostly Pangrave. The Egyptian pottery is very small number, very limited types that seem to be recurring. And chronologically, they really seem to last much longer in Nubian context than they do in Egyptian context. So what I'm wondering is that because they kept it as heirlooms, for example, or I'm just throwing ideas around to try and understand how I can make sense of some of the pottery I have in a Palgrave context. That is, you know, we push the chronology really, really low from a Palgrave point of view, for example.
Yes.
And, you know, Jeanine Bourriot has demonstrated that some of these small jars last in Nubia much longer than they do in Egypt. So they either had a longer circulation period, they were liked, I mean, they are very robust. So it's just, you know, a series of thought that keep going around in my mind, and I haven't found a great answer yet, I'm afraid.
No, because also for the C-Group and Palgrave, we barely have closed vessels. I mean, for the C-Group more than for Palgrave. But I think that's also why the Egyptian pottery was so valuable, because it was like a good production, good Egyptian pharaonic production in the small clay, which was quite resistant, breaking and stuff. But the C-Group itself, I mean, we have these coarse jars, but we don't really, I know one really large vat-like vessel from the C-Group, from Hierakonpolis, from the cemetery. But that's also, again, a problem because we have only or mainly these funerary assemblages. We don't really know what you said before, of course, what they do have in the settlements. So I'm trying to look into this with the material that is accessible. Yeah, I will get back to you.
Thank you very much.
I have the feeling that both of you were right, that indeed there is not an intentional way of doing this, so that, you know, specific productions are only for Nubia, and they are, you know, the old versions of the new productions in Egypt. But it's also true that probably they are good vessels, and they were kept in use much longer in Nubia than in Egypt, just because they were more precious, more difficult to find, or so probably it's both of your options put together. If we want to talk about Palgraves from the First Cataract, the last site that the last cemetery we dug in 2022 is actually very interesting in connection with the C-Group, the end of the C-Group. Because as you said, you have this new chronology, this new proposal for a very low, let's say, end of the C-Group, no? So for the end of the 12th dynasty, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because we have found evidence of C-Groupish pottery in that Palgrave cemetery, and Carla can tell you more, that probably also some of the Egyptian pottery seems to support the idea that there was a very early Nubian evidence at the cemetery, that it's maybe more connected with the C-Group than the Palgrave, or it's Palgrave but with a C-Group connection of some kind, because we have this kind of pottery. So, and
I would love to see that pottery.
Well, you have seen that because Aaron, I think, sent you some pictures and some drawings. So yeah, no, but what is interesting is that the Egyptian pottery there, Carla, right, is supporting maybe the assumption that we have a very early phase that is dated to the late 12th dynasty.
Yes.
And which would support also your idea of the C-Group ending at that time. So Carla, you can tell more, yeah.
Well, as I said, the Egyptian pottery is limited in number and is really fragmentary. And because of this, it's really impossible to create an internal chronology, for example, when it comes to hemispherical cups in Nile B1. We do have a handful, I think about 5 or 6 rim and bases, but you cannot really create any kind of meaningful internal chronology with this kind of fragmentary inserts. So what I have done, I've compared it to the closest one that we have published, that is Elephantine. And both comparing the fabrics, for example, that Theodosia has published, the shapes that she has published, it seems to fit better with a late 12 date. And I concentrated on the hemispherical cup, not just because they are so chronologically significant, but simply because they are so fragile and they break. So they are more likely to be contemporary, because then we have, and I showed it to you when we met at Aswan, you have seen the little jar. That is strange because it's a Marley 3. I know that they don't come normally in Marley 3, but there is a shape that is a similar kind of jar that is even earlier, that is made, that you find in Marley 3 in Egypt. So, you know, there is the possibility that part of the cemetery was that early, but then it lasted for much, much longer, because we have got some Marcy jars, for example, that are dated much later. So there is a continuity. But because the site is so damaged, we can't really even say where some of these pottery come from when it comes to tombs. So it's very difficult to say for certain. You know, maybe there was a C-group cluster of tomb to which a Pangrave cemetery attached later on, maybe. But as I said, much more works needs to be done with the distribution, and try and understand maybe if there are clusters that can help to pinpoint this kind of division.
And I think especially from Edfu, with the pottery that everyone studies, and Natasha for the Egyptian, I think we really need to wait what the result of this will be, because what Erin and me compared for Elephantine and Edfu it's very, very similar. So it's just a question of the Egyptian pottery, what is the actual date, because at Elephantine, we are quite convinced, but I know that you see it somehow differently, but I think we just have to wait for different sites and see what they say.
Yeah, absolutely.
The only thing, that it's interesting from the perspective of this Pangrave cemetery from Aswan is that for the first time we have C-groupish pottery, blacktop pottery there, and the few Egyptian pottery with all the problems that we have seems to suggest a very early date for part of the cemetery. Which would be consistent with your new idea of this new chronology, the revised chronology for the C-group. So this is really interesting also for us, because usually you don't get, the C-group Pangrave connection so close in a cemetery. And there has always been the problem of how they do relate these two archaeological groups, archaeological cultures, which is also the comment that I wanted to say before Carla's intervention. Also for the A group and the Pre-Kerma, or Pangrave C-group, Kerma, these kind of definitions are very troubled. And so probably what was happening in Nubia, upper and lower, in the 4th millennium is much more connected than we think, like also during the early 3rd millennium. So how can we call the Pre-Kerma everywhere, even in places like in Lower Nubia or Upper Egypt, where there was not a Kerma after? So there is actually a C-group. So the terminology is not really helping us understand what was going on, because it's really very biased in different ways. So it's more likely that, the A group and Pre-Kerma is an only horizon. So it's only one horizon, like the Pre-Kerma or the C group, B group, let's say the old B group in the north is another horizon. So it's more, all this archaeological evidence, they are much more connected in a general tradition that it's the Nubian one. So regional differences, variabilities are present clearly, and we should focus more on this than on, let's say, this kind of definitions. Any other questions or comment? No? If not, I guess that we, yes, so Ulrike, please.
You were so sweet to mention me, Marie. Hello. I just wanted to very, very small comment about amulets and stamp seals. I wrote a small article where I compared amulets and stamp seals from Middle Egypt, meaning the region between Kawalkibir and Patma, to the material of Aniba. I mean, this is very small. If that would have to be done seriously for all Nubian find spots eventually. But what I can only say is that when it comes to comparing what is there, and I believe that those are indeed Egyptian pieces that were brought to Nubia, is that they seem to appear at the same time when they are used in Middle Egypt, and that would be the 6th dynasty, basically, so late Old Kingdom, and the shapes, as far as I'm familiar with them, look like they could easily be dated to the 12th dynasty as the latest. I don't see any reason that is inevitable that they should date later, like towards the New Kingdom, for example. So that is absolutely like what, of course, Marie can do with a much wider base and in a much bigger scale with the pottery. So it's just one little facet, but I totally have to agree with the chronology and Marie's results.
Thank you.
So a lot of support to your ideas. Good. Good. Any other questions or comments? No? Well, then, thank you very much again, Marie, for your presentation, and keep going with your work, because it's really interesting. It's helping all of us a lot to better understand this culture that was not really upgraded. The study was not upgraded since the 1960s. So keep doing that, and let's hope for major results, more than the chronology. Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us tonight. And there will be a final seminar in March, so keep checking our social media for news. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.